everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for our town hall on housing. My name is Yasmine-Imani McMorrin. I am honored to run for Culver City Council on November 3rd. And during the day, I serve as the interim dean of students and director of diversity, equity, and inclusion at USC Gould School of Law. And for our city, I serve as vice chair for the General Plan Advisory Committee, as well as on the Equity Strategic Planning Committee for our school district. So let me make sure I don't forget to say this. Thank you so much for joining us. Be sure to share out this feed. We are always trying to get the word out about the campaign. So feel free to share it and share our hashtags, which are Team Yasmine and Vote McMorrin. So thank you so much for doing that. We want to make sure that folks know about the campaign and get to learn a little bit more about me. So thank you for amplifying. And so, we're in this pandemic time. We hope that everyone is staying safe and well, but sort of what has come out of this time is, we have these Connect with Yasmine events and town halls, office hours. We want to make sure that folks are getting to know me and are able to ask questions and are able to engage with the campaign about issues that concern us here in Culver City. So today we're talking about housing. Before I delve directly into housing, I do want to just overarching go over some of the goals for the campaign. So really at the core of who I am and sort of all of my work is equity. So I would like, my vision for Culver City is, a city where whether you work, live, learn, or play here, you're welcomed and included and engaged as an equal part of our community. We want to make sure that we're able to center equity and inclusion in every city policy. We want to make sure that we're doing that also in our budget allocations. And we also want to make sure that we are promoting safe and thriving neighborhoods. So a part of that is, of course, we're talking about housing today, and it's advocating for housing policies that support renters and work to prevent homelessness. Also, that is going to, add to affordable housing options here in Culver City. So I think just framing this a little bit more, my daughter and I, we were renters for most of our time here in Culver City. We're originally from New Jersey. And so we were renters up until May of this year. And a part of the reason why we became homeowners this year was because our housing became insecure. Renters are 48% of the Culver City population. So that's almost half. So we want to make sure that we have strong renter protections. We want to make sure that we're also bolstering that with making sure that we are having strong advocacy for additional affordable housing units. So I just will never forget coming home in January of 2020, pre-COVID, no mask, everything is normal. But seeing that notice on our door, right, that there was going to be a sale. And it's just, we want to make sure that folks can have security. We want to make sure that we're doing everything we can as a city to show up for our neighbors, to show up for folks to make sure that they too, can continue to call Culver City home. So that was a little briefer than I thought it would be, but let's just go right into it. I want to highlight some of my amazing guests that we're going to have today to chat a little bit more about housing in Culver City and share some ideas about how we can sort of tackle this issue that's not just here in Culver City, but with a specific lens on Culver City. So we have Chelsea Byers. I don't know if she's going to come up here. So she'll be joining us. We also have Idemudia. And so both of these lovely women, I also want to just note that it wasn't intentional that we're all women panel today, but I'm so proud that we are. So shout out to us. But both of these lovely women I've met through New Leaders Council. Again, a lot of my guests that I tend to have on this platform happens to be my NOC folks. I'm not biased, I promise. But there's just a lot of fantastic folks in the network. So let's just, we can dive right in. We have a little bit extra time. So that's great. So Chelsea, feel free to share with us, share a little bit of your experience with housing, and let's go.
Yeah, thanks so much. It really is great to be in these conversations with family. NLC family is a big extended one, and it's always so great to be in conversation with you all. And I know my personal relationship with housing starts with my family too. So my own personal family. So I'm going to start there. I grew up in Arizona as the daughter of a tile setter. I don't come from generational wealth. I come from a very modest family. My dad was an artist to me, but his medium was tile. And I would follow him and his, artistic doings, which was really setting tile in people's homes my entire childhood. So I had this amazing opportunity to go see people's dream homes be constructed by the hands of my dad growing up, and just loved it. I mean, I got so many amazing homes all throughout the Phoenix area and even further than that, and just loved home, loved helping construct and build home. And I didn't really think about how important that really was to me until the year 2007, 2008 happened. I was a senior in high school, and the financial crisis hit my family really hard, and we lost what was really the only wealth that my family had been able to amass for themselves through our home. The financial crisis and everything that came with it took my family's home from us. My family is, a generation of renters to this day. I'm extending that legacy. I'm a renter here in Los Angeles now. But I really think about that. 2008 was such a formidable moment in my life. And I was transitioning out of my family's home. I was going off to college. I'm in tremendous student loan debt because while I was granted full ride scholarships to go to schools, I didn't have a full ride to pay for room and board. So just thinking about all the wealth accumulation and debt accumulation I've had just in the name of being able to live somewhere. And that goes for my family too. It's pretty tremendous. So in that turn, in realizing that I was part of an oppressed population of renters who were going to be fighting for equity, for some sort of ability to maintain stay in communities for the long haul, and really seeing that, I got involved in political organizing pretty early. I started working on college campus, fighting for people who felt disenfranchised from the political system to be able to have access to that political system. In that sense, it was students, but I was always really eager to make sure that people weren't being left out of the conversation, or worse, being intentionally pushed out of the conversation. And so coming to Los Angeles, as I did 6 years ago, I continued that stay of work. I started looking around and saying, well, where are people being pushed out or left out of the conversation? And housing became that thing that hit me straight in the face again. You can't really move to Los Angeles and feel like, unless you are a millionaire, like you have access to a lot of parts in the city, or that you can't see that it's going to be, the challenge that it is. I just finished a move. I'm actually sitting around boxes right now in my new apartment, and just the process of moving, how expensive it was. Los Angeles is not doing anybody any favors. And I think it ought to be. We're a city where we have tremendous diversity, tremendous amounts of people who want to come here to make a life for themselves. And we don't make that easy at all, starting with the foundation of our lives, which is home. Rents are extremely costly. We know Culver City was one of the, most recent cities in the 88 counties to get some renter protections, and they're not even permanent. I mean, I laugh at the idea that Beverly Hills had stronger renter protections in its city than Culver City did at one point. I know we'll get to that. But all of this sort of reality, as it was crashing down on me, as somebody who, with some privilege, I'm a white woman, I'm college educated, I can get jobs. I still was struggling to figure out how I'm going to make my life work in Los Angeles and do so for the long haul. And so I got involved in neighborhood council meetings, city council meetings, just doing the thing I knew to do, show up, right? Show up, have my voice heard. A lot of people don't know how to do that. They don't have the time to do that. And so I always walk into rooms holding that weight of the community who can't represent themselves on my shoulders and trying to do so. And I kid you not, in one of those very first neighborhood council meetings, a woman said, you actually don't get to say anything in this meeting because you haven't lived here long enough. I've lived here for 30 years and you haven't. So you cannot tell me that we need more affordable housing in this neighborhood. Like, I wasn't alive I just turned 30. Like, I wasn't even alive for 30 years at that point for this woman to tell me, because I haven't been a homeowner in that community for 30 years, I didn't have a say. So right then, in that collision of moments, I didn't have a total grasp at Los Angeles's housing policy or where we were. It was maybe 2015 when that conversation smacked me in the face. I mean, I was like, hello, aren't we in the middle of a housing crisis? And we weren't using that language. So in 2015 in Los Angeles, as a very new resident, I just knew I needed to get involved. 3 years later, I was able to find, through my volunteer advocacy, through showing up at those meetings, I was able to get connected to what became United Way's, major effort, the Everyone In campaign, being able to catalyze the funds that were voted on by the public in 2017, 2018 to address homelessness and help people start connecting the dots in real ways between the exclusion that was happening at these meetings, the true housing crisis that maybe hadn't been fully named at that point, and the opportunity ahead of us to make good on a promise that we needed to for Los Angeles, that this could be a city for all. So, it's 2020. The world has changed a lot this year alone. But I feel like I'm still helping people connect those dots between who has been missing from the conversation or intentionally excluded, and how we make our cities open and inclusive for all people. And housing is the most foundational, I think, of all of that. So really glad to be with you all having this conversation today.
Chelsea, girl. My daughter and I, we moved here in 2016. I remember, choosing to live in Culver City, but being incredibly discouraged because of housing costs, wondering like, how do, families like mine, single families, afford to live here? We have one of the most diverse school districts, which was a part of one of the reasons why I wanted to live here. And it's like, and then you come into city council or you come into these meetings and it's like, well, you just got here. So your opinion is not as valuable as mine. And I don't think that folks really intend it that way. But, I think it's so important. I believe 25% of folks in Culver City have moved here within the past 5 years. And that's a significant, percentage. And it's because, in large part, because of the schools and the community, the walkability, et cetera, et cetera. But, we are all valuable in this conversation about what the future of Culver City is going to look like. So it just resonated so much with me. Thank you for sharing, and I'll ask some more questions. I took some notes over here, but we're gonna shift over to Nina now. Nina is a planner. She is fantastic. So I'm so happy.
Yeah, so my name is Nina. I am originally from Detroit, Michigan. As you can see behind me, I'm a very proud Detroiter. It doesn't take long for me to tell somebody that I'm from the city. And being born and raised in Detroit really gave me the inspiration at an early age to become a planner, even though I never knew what planning was until I got to college. Because growing up in Detroit, I don't know if any of you have actually been to the city, but I'm sure you've heard about the Motor City. You've probably heard about the problems that we've had. We were the largest city to declare bankruptcy in the 2000s. The auto industry failing definitely, inhibited our economic growth. But then also just in the 1970s, we had a large economic decline, white flight happening, where a lot of the white taxpayers fled the city of Detroit and went to the suburbs and left it. And Detroit is to this day one of the only predominantly Black cities in the nation. And so growing up in that environment, I definitely understood that my built environment was different than where I went to school, because I went to school on the east side suburbs in Harper Woods. And so I would take the city bus every day from my house to the suburbs to go to school. And every day I would just see how the built environment changed, just like the parks, the houses, how commercial buildings were actually went from vacant to being full, how the setbacks were different, or how just how it looked was different. The amenities were different. And so at the time I never really knew what to call that. But then as I got older and started to learn about systematic racism, about redlining, about urban renewal and all of those different programs that happened through the government and that were government sanctioned to specifically make sure that Black and brown folks stayed, but specifically Black folks stayed on one side of the line, and that white folks were able to get mortgages and move to the suburbs and be able to flourish and have all of these things. I was like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that I was growing up in literally a petri dish of this environment of like, we want to be able to systematically have the haves and the have-nots, and and this is how it looks. So once I got to college, I actually studied African American studies and women's studies because I just wanted to, like really study myself as a Black woman and get to know more about my history and the richness of it. I stumbled upon urban planning. And so for me, housing is both professional and personal, right? So like growing up in the city, growing up in Detroit, seeing how it looks, but then also understanding on a systematic level. Now that I'm a planner, I literally write ordinances for major cities. I used to work for the city of Los Angeles for several years. I've written several ordinances and have worked on many projects within the city of Los Angeles. I could actually walk around Los Angeles and say, oh, I helped build that. Oh, I helped build that, which is really cool. But just understanding, even when I moved from Detroit and moving to South Central, where I lived for the entire time that I lived in Los Angeles, seeing like I would joke and say like, oh, South Central is just Detroit with palm trees, right? Because the systematic racism and how it manifests is the same. Like, like the housing patterns and, the lack of resources, the lack of grocery stores on where the predominantly Black and brown people live versus if you go to Culver City and there's more resources, right? And just seeing the economic patterns where I grew up 2,000 miles away be the exact same in California was a really interesting thing. And then also to work in the government at that point and to see how these conversations at the table go, right? Because for a lot of those conversations, I was the only one. And even to this day, being a Black woman planner whose bread and butter is land use and zoning, which I mean is not the most exciting thing for most people, right? Like getting into the nitty gritty of the laws and the requirements. As Chelsea was mentioning, like what are the protections for renters? Like who comes up with that language, right? There's usually a whole bunch of white men at the table making those decisions. And so being able to see behind the veil and be one of those people, I've learned that it's so important to have diverse leaders and political will like people who are going to push the envelope and say, no, we're going to embed equity into the policy. We're going to make sure that there's no holes for developers in the ordinance. Like we're going to put that in there. That is so important from our leaders. And in my experience of being a planner, recently, I actually moved to Chicago. Again, part of it was professional, but part of it was personal. The rent control building that I had lived in for 7 straight years was sold. And I got an Ellis Act eviction. And so as a young professional, and as Chelsea said, with a lot of student loan debt,
right,
I had a decision in front of me. I said I could either try to make it work in Southern California and I worked at the city of Los Angeles. I could either move to Palmdale and truck it in for 2 hours a day, or I could follow my dreams and get closer to home and work for another major city. And for me, I decided to move out of state and go to Chicago. And so now I'm here. I worked for the city of Chicago for a short time, and now I'm the director of planning at a private firm called Muse Community Design, where all of our work is based in equity, and we work specifically on ordinances and zoning and land use things. And again, equity being the basis of that, because I've seen how important it is that people and decision makers behind the veil of creating these ordinances and policies really focus and be centered around equity from the gate in order to make more opportunities for people. A lot of times when it comes to housing, which I believe is a basic right for every human being.
Period.
It's really, period. That's period, right? It's about creating options, right? So when people hear affordable housing, especially when the government is saying it, people usually think, oh, Section 8 or, oh, housing vouchers, right? But it's really about giving people at every economic level the opportunity to have safe and clean housing, right? So as a young professional working for the city of Los Angeles, I could not even afford to live in Los Angeles, right? And I have a master's degree. I have all these things, all the things that they say are the right things to have in order to be able to afford to live in a city like Los Angeles. And I decided to move out of the state. And so think about how many more people are experiencing that throughout Southern California, and what we can do as leaders in this industry to make sure that people don't have to make those tough decisions, and that they can stay where they want to stay and invest in the communities that they believe in without having to sacrifice their their quality of life. Like that, you shouldn't have to choose. And so that's why I've really dedicated my life. Clearly, in the built environment, I focus on housing, but I also focus on a whole bunch of other things. But housing, again, is so fundamental, especially because land and land use is such a valuable tool in creating generational wealth. And that's what a lot of people focus on. It's unfortunate that people focus on that, but that's the world that we live in. So working in the confines of that, how do we make sure that people have all the opportunities that they need in front of them in order to have a good life and to have clean and affordable housing?
Yeah. So I just want to say, I helped build that, boss.
Flex. I didn't do that in Chicago. You know, it's funny because I was driving past somewhere yesterday in Chicago, and I've only been here a year, and I was like, "Oh, I helped build that. They're constructing that already." Like, it's actually a pretty cool feeling.
Energy, love it. So I just want to, so thank you so much, both of you.
Yeah.
I'm going to make sure to, if you are watching from the Vote McMorrin Facebook page, please, if you have any questions, just type them there. If you watched on a share out, we won't be able to see your questions there. So you have to go to the facebook.com/Vote McMorrin page to give us some Q&A. So please do so. And we'll be able to address some of those, but we're just going to chat about housing now. Yeah. So Nina, I really feel like what you touched on, like, I know too many, first of all, I was sad when you left because why? Damn, right?
Times, yes.
There's another girlfriend that we know that's going to be just bought a home in Portland, right? And we're seeing like young professionals with degrees and, you know, who are, you know, successful or whatever, but still not being able to afford, you know, a good quality of life here. And I'm really concerned about that. And like, how are we, like, I guess in terms of when you frame that with Culver City, you know, I think the average rent is about $2,400 or so. Yeah, I mean, when you're dealing with that, it's like, who can afford to live here? I've heard from many folks, it's like, I don't know if my kids are going to be able to, you know, go off to college and come back home. And I think that's what makes this issue real for folks who probably already have stable housing. Maybe they, you know, may have inherited their homes or just been living here for a really long time, like their children not being able to come back and also, you know, have a quality, you know, level of living here makes this issue realer for some folks who might not be as close to, you know, or feeling the lack of affordability that is definitely present, particularly in Culver City, but really in LA County as well. So I don't know, what do you guys think are some ways to mitigate some of that? And I know, Chelsea, you also picked up on the fact that we just actually on my birthday last year, I feel like my birthday is a special day for renter protection. Shout out to actually turned 31 in city council chambers last year when we passed temporary renter protections in 2019. Before that, there were no protections. Landlords could raise the rent as frequently as they want. You know, it was just a really, you know, precarious situation for renters, and the inherent power imbalance is super clear if you're paying any attention to how the dynamic works. And so I'm really grateful as a renter. At the time, I was incredibly grateful for that support from our city council for seeing families like mine and recognizing that we needed support. So I don't know, what do you guys think is the right way or a way that we can move forward and sort of mitigate or address some of the harms that are inherent in just the costs of living? Is that looking at density? Is that looking at maybe mixed use, parking minimums, like some of the, you know, that's a way that I think we might be able to do that. But I just talk a little bit more about your ideas on that.
From a regulatory perspective, because like I said, I've worked in the government for almost my entire career, and have worked on ordinances and laws and different policies. And, you know, one of your primary objectives is to center equity in city policy, which I think is important and something that needs to be called out even more. Because as I was going through the Ellis Act eviction, and there's only so much I can say about the entire situation because I had to sign an NDA. And even as a planner going through that situation, I was a planner working at the city of Los Angeles, and my roommate was a planner who was a professional planner. She worked at a planning firm. We had the most egregious time trying to navigate our way through that entire situation. It was stressful. Yeah. We were sitting there literally looking at case law and reading it back and forth to each other, like, does this even make sense? So what's our next step, and what protections do we have? What's the extension? So I think just at its base, I think creating more protections and making it very, very clear about what is required of a developer and what is required of a tenant. There's so much red tape and minutia in the language, in the policy, that even two people who have master's degrees in planning in this 4-unit building, and mind you, we were organizing our 4-unit building, and we were the most qualified, quote unquote qualified people to do this, because we're like, oh, we're planners, like we'll be able to navigate this. It was so stressful. It was a 6-month process of going back and forth and, dealing with paperwork and trying to, get something that was fair, so that, so that our neighbors at the very least would not be on the street. Right. And so I think that being one of the first things is making policy much more clear and much more effective on the rights of what the tenant has and what resources they have, and then also offering them free resources. Because what we did for organizing our building, we did all of that labor for free, of course, without a doubt. But just think, if our neighbors didn't have me and my roommate, they would have either signed away their life for like pennies, right? Or would have been tossed out on the street otherwise, right? Because they were coming to us like, we don't understand this. And then we go back to our apartment and like, we don't understand it either. And so I think that's one of the first things. Mm-hmm. One of the second things that I say, and even now living in Chicago, and I love Chicago because it is much more dense than California, right? And so I think density is a bad word in LA and in Southern California, but in Chicago, it's not. They have zoning policies that are much more progressive in that way. They also have an affordable requirement. So there's certain zones within the city of Chicago that require affordable to be built on site, or you can pay in lieu fees, but it's either 10% or 20% depending on where it is. And so I would have to, when I worked for the city of Chicago, I would have to work on those cases, make sure that the developer, in partnership with the Department of Housing, was fulfilling their requirements and their obligations to create affordable housing on site or within 5 miles of the location, or pay in this in lieu fee into our into this affordable housing trust. And I think that these types of laws in Illinois are much more progressive than they are in California. And I know that there's clearly two states with two different, type of setups, but I think there's things that in California that you could learn from Illinois, in the sense of not being afraid of density, because Chicago, even though it's a dense city, the way it's urban, the design of the city doesn't make it feel like it's heavy or imposing, right? And I think that that's one of the problems that in California, especially in Southern California, they just haven't dealt with that, or haven't had really good design in order to not make it imposing. So, you get the pitchforks at the meeting because they're like, you're going to ruin our views, or you're going to take away our parking. And incorporating transportation, because you can't have dense housing without adequate public transportation. So that's why I say, like, I'm into the built environment, and housing is a component of that, but you really have to have all of those things in line in order to say, we're going to create housing for the missing middle. We're going to create affordable housing for low income folks. And we're going to create housing types for the people, for the high end earners. And we're going to mix it up so that you won't be able to tell the difference between who makes $100,000 and who makes $30,000. I think that's probably the regulatory piece that I think is the most important. And you really have to have a leader like yourself who has the foresight to see that those things all need to coexist.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate, the way you said density is a bad word, right? Yeah. And it totally is. But I challenge us to remember, like, who wrote that dictionary?
Right.
Like, like it's, like often white, wealthy homeowners that are the ones at these meetings saying density is a bad word. And I think you made the point earlier, Nina, you're getting to it around generational wealth. It's a tragedy that we just look at housing and, our communities as an opportunity to sort of extract wealth for ourselves. And I understand the homeowner perspective around that. If that is your savings account in your home, then of course you're going to like fiercely do everything you can to protect it, as misguided as those protections may be. I'll give them, it's misguided versus like an intentional racist act. But anyways, I digress. So part of the challenge of the work I do, organizing in community, is helping people understand density in a positive light. We're not talking about overcrowding. We're talking about really effective land use. Land use is the biggest social justice issue I think we have to deal with in Los Angeles. And I think of it like, especially on the West Side in Culver City, like there's been some, runaway folks just getting theirs and making sure others can't. And that those policies have been in place for decades. And so while I'm excited and, so grateful for Yasmine's ability to see equity in every single piece of the platform, I mean, your goals page starts with equity, and then it's the through line and everything else, right? I feel like we've been trying to get, it's housing, there's a housing crisis, and now we have to talk about how there's a housing crisis for everyone. But just talking about equity first and foremost, why don't people have access to these neighborhoods? Why don't people have access to the housing that they need at all levels? You're okay with somebody coming all the way to West LA to work for you, to serve you, but you're not okay with them living in this neighborhood that forces traffic problems, that forces environmental congestion. So there's issues that a liberal California would be really ready to tackle, but isn't understanding how housing has been such a critical component of actually making these things real. And it does come back to that wealth piece, the people who've been in these meetings protecting what is theirs for so long. And so I think it's about, breaking this open. COVID's given us an opportunity to talk about how our ability to be in deep relationship to one another, to have healthy, vibrant communities, is beneficial to all of us. Right. I mean, the best example of density I've heard, and that's COVID related, health pandemic, right? West Hollywood Community Housing Corporation, that specializes in making housing and dense housing for low income communities, has had 0 cases of COVID this entire time, in spite of, people living in these really vibrant communities all around each other. So don't tell me that density is the bad thing. Right? It's a community that doesn't have access to the resources it needs, and we can do that if we do it well. And I just so appreciate on your goals the way that you don't look at these things all as different policies, but it's like a quilt that actually has to be threaded together. Parking minimums and transit have to work together. We're not having 2 distinct conversations. It's the same conversation. And I know that complexity is a lot for folks to hold. But I think if 2020 has taught us anything, it's like we've got to hold some complexity if we're going to make it anywhere forward, right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. I feel like I just want to lift up, and I know some folks might be a little uncomfortable with this, but I think it's relevant, especially as we talk about housing, particularly in Culver City, to note that Culver City used to be a sundown town, meaning that it was not safe for African Americans or folks of color to be in our city after the sun went down. And we also had restrictive covenants and things in place which intentionally excluded Black or BIPOC individuals from purchasing. And, there's more I could say on the exclusionary nature of certain city services, but I think that is incredibly relevant. I mean, Nina spoke about it with redlining and, how that sort of transpired in Detroit, and also Chelsea also alluded to it. And I mean, I think it is important to lift up the historical patterns of single family zoning and restrictive covenants, which have created, I think, sort of the situation that we find ourselves in today. And as a general plan, we get, updates from consultants and staff. And I think it's important to note that there is an incredible housing imbalance, housing and jobs imbalance here in Culver City, whereas we have 45 jobs per every 1 housing unit. And conversely, in our county, it's for every 1 housing unit, there's 2.5 jobs. So there's an incredible housing imbalance, as Chelsea mentioned, that has impacts on traffic, the environment. We need to work on our, first last mile. I mean, I used to take the train to work back when, we used to go to work, but like all of these things, again, it's just it all builds on one another. So I see here that a question has come into the chat, and it says, when Culver City puts what is the highest percentage of affordable housing have you seen in your work, Nina?
I've seen 100% affordable buildings in my work. So it really just depends on the developer. It depends on what the city's regulations are. At this point, I've lived in 3 different states and kind of have seen 3 different scenarios of different housing policies. So yeah, it honestly just depends on what the city's regulations are. But at the minimum in Chicago, like I said, it's 10 to 20%, and then from there, it could be a completely 100% affordable building. I do think that for me, again, thinking about the regulation side, it's not a one size fits all situation. And I want to make that clear, because there are communities, especially when you're thinking about the African American community, who has been left out of the home ownership game for literally decades, right? I just bought a house last year. I actually just celebrated my 1-year anniversary of buying a house when I moved to Chicago. Thank you. Right? And so for some of us, for some Black families, owning a single family home is something that we want to invest in, because we've been left out of that for many generations. And so I don't want to come down and say like single family home ownership or single family zoning is completely should not be an option for affordable housing options, because home ownership, that should also be affordable, right? So we're thinking about rents, we're thinking about actual federally controlled or state controlled housing, which looks like, like what you call a housing project, but it doesn't look like that anymore. It doesn't have to look like that anymore. And then we're also thinking about, how can we also make home ownership affordable? How do we make sure that millennials who have $100,000 worth of student loan debt can actually get a mortgage, right? Can actually invest in something, because I'd rather pay my mortgage than to pay those student loans. To me, from a regulatory perspective, it's about giving people options, right? I want little Black girls like Nina to have the option to rent or to own, right? Or to live in Culver City and live in a 25-person apartment building, or to live in a single family apartment building. But cities have concentrated so much on one of those options that they've generationally left out a group of people purposefully, right? And now we need to go back to those regulations and say, hey, you've been prioritizing single family homes for the last 70 years. It's time to upzone, Vice versa, when we're looking at communities that have been devastated and disinvested in, saying, how can we use that? Look at Detroit. I mean, on my block growing up, there was houses on every street. Now my mom lives on a block with 3 houses. So it's like, there's plenty of land, but how do we make sure that young folks who want to move back to Detroit and own a single family home have the housing stock to do so? And so there's lots of programs throughout Detroit. You can buy a house for $1,000. You can, there's regulations about how you fix it up. But again, it's about having the option and looking at a city and saying, what has your history been, and how can we auto correct that so that people have more options?
Yeah. So I know we're like coming up on the time, but I want to make sure that we touch on pathways to becoming housed and how to deal with folks in our community who might not want certain policies, or might not want to have additional units, or to change zoning. Like, how do we deal with really, it's fear, right? It's fear of change and the unknown. And so I'm not trying to minimize that real fear, because it's, it's lots of stuff coming up that, that is real, and we need to recognize it. And how do we educate, assure, and still allow us to move forward and move toward progress in this area? I mean, Culver City has been mandated to create 3,300 additional units of housing, and we have, 5.2 square miles, right? So we want to make sure that, how do we navigate and making sure our community is buying into this change and this expansion in Culver City?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. And I also just saw another question that dropped in around the 3Ps. So I'll try to stream them all into one. In my experience, a lot is just misinformation or misunderstanding. So as many opportunities as possible to welcome people in, to get the word out to folks. The education is the thing. I don't know if it's the city's responsibility to convert everyone into a believer or a supporter of these objectives, but I think it's really about electing the right leadership who's going to hold the seat for the future and for the voices who aren't ever going to be a part of those conversations, but knowing that that housing is not being mandated for no one. It's being mandated for people who are going to fill it, who are going to be a part of our communities and, support our communities in all these ways. And there's going to be people and elected leaders who don't want to see that housing built. So I think it's supporting the right leaders who will hold that seat at the table for the voices who aren't going to be represented to get that job done, and ensuring that the community understands that constructing new homes isn't the only thing we're doing. We're protecting renters, right? That's what the 3Ps are all about. Produce new housing, protect existing housing, and protect tenants who are in existing affordable housing. We can do all three of those things at once. It's not a one option. We have to do all three. And if there's misinformation, a lot of it just is in the idea that people think that one of these things isn't happening. We're doing all of them. And elected leaders are going to do them even better than before.
Yeah. And I would just add, honestly, people need to really look up the definition of equity. And I'm not trying to be funny, but the whole purpose of equity is to analyze the resources that are needed and give them to those who need the most, right? So the people who are yelling and screaming with their pitchforks about we don't want this and we don't want that do not need the resources. The people who are probably not going to show up on a Tuesday afternoon to a city council meeting because they have a job or two, or they need childcare, or they have these other systematic issues within their lives. Those are the people that we need to be advocating for. It's about the greater good for society, not the greater good for those who already have the resources. So equity is not equality. It's not about being equal. It's about, again, giving society's most vulnerable populations the resources that they need to thrive and giving them the opportunity to thrive, right? So I think if people concentrate on that, we don't really have to worry about the gag flies at the meeting every Tuesday with their pitchforks, because the policy is not for them.
Right. And it benefits everyone. Like if those who are, without the lease are like, I feel like if we're focusing policy for those who have the lease, it lifts all boats, right? Yeah. So I see a question came in about, as a Culver City resident, parent of 2 kids, what are some policies in Culver that I can help push the city to adopt or expand? I would just say when things come up, make public comment or submit it if you're not able to stay. I know the meetings can sometimes run late. So please, we need folks who are going to hold us accountable as a city. Hopefully I'm elected in November, but even, we need to be held accountable, and we need to know that there are folks in our community who are pushing for a more equitable Culver City, for more affordable housing, for, lower parking minimums, all these things, and also protecting renters, right? I think that is a key piece that sometimes folks try to discredit as not valuable, because we want to protect the incredible diversity that is reflected in Culver City as a result of our renter population. Right. So I want to be respectful of time. We're having such a good conversation though, and there's some things that we didn't touch on that I wish we could have, but I just want to deeply just express my appreciation for Miss Yasmine-Imani and Miss Chelsea Byers. You guys are rock stars. I'm honored to know you, be in community with you. And I'm so grateful to New Leaders Council for connecting us. We know each other.
Yes.
So thank you so much for your time and your expertise.
So excited for you to win in November. I'm calling it into existence.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. I'm of course going to, if you haven't already donated, please donate at votemcmorran.com. You can also sign up as a supporter or get a fun yard sign or window sign and just show your support for us here in the city. I am grateful for your time. If we didn't get to your question, I'll try to answer some, from the Facebook page. But thank thank you so much for your support, and have a wonderful rest of your Sunday. And please take good care. It's been a heavy week. I didn't address that. Folks are grieving, and it's been tough even for me. So sending love to folks, and take good care of yourselves, and be well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chelsea. Take care, you guys.
Bye.
Have a good Sunday.